Hi, this is James Torme. My latest album is Love for Sale, and you're listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. Nowhere in the world celebrates modernism better than Palm Springs, California. It's the home of Modernism Week, a week-long architecture and design festival that actually lasts 11 days. Again this year, U.S. Modernist Radio was there, speaking with nearly all of Modernism Week's keynote speakers plus special guests. Most of them joined us poolside at the U.S. Modernist Compound, the retro Hotel Skylark on North Palm Canyon Drive in Palm Springs. If you are in the mid-century modern, you have to get to Modernism Week. It's the epicenter of mid-century architecture, with eye-popping house parties, brilliantly curated house tours, detailed art and architecture exhibits, plentiful martinis, and much more. I'm Tom Guild. You get your steps in during Mod Week. Palm Springs is very walkable. Of course, with its history of being Hollywood's secret getaway, they have a Walk of Stars. You can step on everyone from Ginger Rogers and Bob Hope to Rock Hudson, Mamie Van Doren, Lily Tomlin, and even General George Patton. While you're out, you'll probably see more exotic and classic cars parked along the street in one afternoon than in a lifetime of car shows in other, more boring places. Walking during Mod Week is fun, and it's free. And now, the guy with too many houses stored up in his head, your host, George Smart.
Yeah, that has become a problem, because I've been working on this archive now for 15 years. These names and streets and architects and houses just seep in there. And so I go to parties and somebody will say, well, I knew blah, blah, blah next door. And I just like, bing. It's really being like an idiot savant, I think. Most of the time I'm the idiot, but...
So every now and then you're the savant.
Every now and then.
I get it.
One of the things that we love about Palm Springs is the Thursday night street fair, which happens every Thursday night during the season. This is a set of booths like you might find in many cities of food, art, social causes, and it's quite large. It probably covers about 7-8 blocks, and the side streets starts about 6:30, 7 o'clock at night and goes for a couple of hours. You can grab something to eat. You can visit the booths. Also, all the downtown businesses and bars are open, and it's free to attend. It's really a great time. If you'd like to go with me and Tom to Modernism Week in 2023 and stay with us at the swanky U.S. Modernist Compound, email me at george@usmodernist.org. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs, and by modernist realtor Angela Roll. In a story that we are largely making up, modernist realtor Angela Roll worked her way through college, dancing like no one's watching to Mambo No. 5 and brilliantly house-flipping Neutra, sometimes simultaneously. At 22, following a celebrity-filled party at a famous hillside L.A. modernist house involving diving off the roof into the pool, absolute Le Mans, and a new use for WD-40, Angela was recruited to the architecture school, where after years of sleep-deprived design studios, she's now a modernist real estate agent with specialized training, advising buyers and sellers on everything from appropriate renovation to saving a completely doomed mid-century house from destruction. That last one is true. Reach her at angelaroll.com. That's ROEHL or 919-995-0550.
Architect Eddie Jones is founder of Jones Studio, based in Phoenix. He began practice in 1979, starting out with a T-square, some pencils, and a desk in his Ralph Haver designed house. His book, Jones Studio House, Sensual Modernism, looks back on Eddie's quiet yet influential 40-year career through photos and personal stories. George chatted with architect Eddie Jones in Palm Springs.
Whenever I hear the term organic architecture, I always think of plants. And there is a connection to nature here with this. What is it?
It's funny you should ask, George. I'm on the founding board of governors to the School of Architecture, the former Frank Lloyd Wright School of Architecture.
Which is now at Arcasanti?
It is,
okay.
And the students are thriving, and the school is soaring. So thanks for asking.
Yeah.
But we're getting ready to put on an exhibit, about what does it even mean to be an organic architect or organic artist. And so I'm sure we're going to get a very wide spectrum of responses. My generation was influenced, as even today, Frank Lloyd Wright's philosophy of organic architecture, and that's evolved. And I think it's a very personal question. And for me, even I'm evolving with it. The easy answer is that nature has all the answers. She shows you the way through structure, through simplicity, no more, no less than it has to be. But I've, in my years, have really embraced the relationship of architecture to nature. And I try to give nature a voice in my buildings. And how do I do that? Maybe you're familiar with the artist Andy Goldsworthy,
okay,
a British artist living in Scotland. He has somehow sustained a childlike mind like Bruce Goff. And he can walk, he's an older man now, but he can walk into nature and just give him any wilderness, give him any lake bed, beach, mountain, and he will listen to the voice of nature and be inspired, and then he will build something. Maybe it's with leaves, maybe it's with twigs, maybe it's with rocks. If you're not familiar with his work, you would recognize it.
Build something that is a work of art?
Yes.
Okay.
But always temporary. It's outside. And he photographs them. And then he returns a few weeks later and photographs them. Sometimes it's hourly that nature is transforming his
So
work.
it's over a period of time.
Yes, but isn't that beautiful? And then it disappears. People talk about sustainable architecture, the kind that is gentle on the planet and doesn't leave a footprint. That's Goldsworthy's work. I mean, he's not doing buildings that are inhabited, but he is doing structures. And our responsibility as architects is much greater than that, of course. But I am now allowing my buildings, I am making choices of materials, I'm making choices of form, orientation, that allows my buildings to decay, to grow old, to get better. And they do get better. Nature is a far better designer than I am. And she will shrink a piece of wood and she will change its color and crack it and warp it. And that in combination with all the other pieces of wood, you get these light patterns that are absolutely amazing. You get gravity starts to show, in the direction of the accumulation of fungus, wet, dry, wet, dry. I mean, it's beautiful. All you have to do is have the eyes to see that.
Now, as a non-architect, which I am, it seemed to me just looking from the outside that organic architecture at its sort of most simplest form is the addition of curves that often distinguishes it from other buildings. But I know there's a lot more to it than that.
Totally disagree with that.
Okay, but
it has nothing to do with specific form. It doesn't even have to do with specific materiality, other than I've never seen an example of what would be described as an organic piece of architecture that was made out of a material that was pretending to be something else. Fake rock, fake wood, whatever. They're always authentic in the fact of their materiality, and they are authentic in their form, given that it's a logical structure, it's not contrived, it just is what it is. And like a flower, how many blossoms have you seen in your life that are completely different, yet the color, there's a reason for the color, there's a reason for the scale, there's a reason for the shape. All of it is explainable.
You sound like somebody who grows buildings.
That's quite a compliment. Thank you. I like that.
Okay.
I grow them and then I let them go.
Put a little bit of Scots on the top, and there you go, right?
Yeah. Well, I doubt if you're familiar with my work, but if you come to the lecture, this may start to make a lot more sense to you.
Well, your lecture is called Sensual Modernism.
Yeah.
Which is a great title, of course.
My grandson said, "Grandpa, that sounds kind of sexual." I said, "Yeah, Slater."
Wait, grandson. Wait, you're 4 years old. How do you know the word sexual?
No, he's 20.
Okay, well,
I told him, I said, "Slater, the babes love architecture. How do you think I snagged your grandma?"
Oh, you
but
can
actually,
stop now.
it was Aaron Betsky that suggested this sensual.
Really?
I think I had called the book Vernacular Modernism, something like that.
Yeah, not so good as Sensual.
And and Aaron said, who I had drinks with last night, he's the one, I have to give him credit, he suggested that title.
So the book is a retrospective of your work over the years.
Well, it's incomplete. I just chose 14, quote, houses, which includes my office building where I work, my studio, which I consider a house. And then it also includes a conceptual project, 100-story skyscraper of living units and live work and all of that. But most of my work is large, complex federal projects, land ports of entry.
Okay.
Do you know what that? Have you ever crossed into Mexico? Well, you crossed a land port of entry.
Okay.
And Jones Studios, become what I say the darling of GSA, General Service Administration, who owns all of those land ports of entry.
Those don't sound like people that want to grow buildings, though.
Right. Why do you think we keep getting them? Because we grow them. And I know this is a stretch to believe, but the federal government, the General Service Administration, has what's called the Design Excellence Program. They demand, mandate, require design excellence.
Is this from the Moynihan Guidelines?
Yes. And in spite of all the administrations that have come and gone since Patrick Moynihan, that program is still in place. And it protects architects that like to grow buildings, even if they're on 54-acre sites and hundreds of thousands of square feet.
So, of the projects that you've done like this, what's the most beautiful port of entry that I should go visit?
Well, of course you're going to hear me say the next one. I do. I'll say the first one is probably the largest and most comprehensive. I mean, we literally had to remove an existing tired port that was fighting valiantly to stay relevant and keep up with security protocols and politics and all that nonsense, but take it down and rebuild the entire thing without ever shutting down the port.
Where was this?
Nogales.
Nogales,
and
okay.
Nogales has two land ports. The DeConcini ports in Nogales proper, and Mariposa is 5 miles to the west. And it's huge. It's a commercial trucking port. 65% of the produce we consume in the United States crosses that border. It's a billion-dollar business on the border. Now, I live in Arizona, and every night on the 6 o'clock news, I've got to hear about all the, can I say BS?
Sure.
About immigration and invading and, all that mess. And it's simply not true. But see, we get, Jones Studio gets to impact that. We get to actually grow an architecture that represents the dignity of our government and says, welcome.
It is
to our
the
visitors.
first thing that you see when you arrive in America.
It's the gateway.
Yeah.
And the Design Excellence Program recognizes that. And in spite of the conflicting goals of Customs and Border Protection wanting, law enforcement, which I get, there's GSA wanting welcome to the United States. Now Eddie, those are two opposing views. That's why I love being an architect, because I get to resolve that. And by God, we do it every time.
Wow.
Well, how do you make a port of entry in which trucks and cars are crossing more inviting, more appealing, more attractive?
You grow it in a garden.
Okay.
You begin to prioritize, you begin to respect the indigenous landscaping and the potential of what it can be. So here we've got a 54-acre site on Mariposa. The landscaping is lush and beautiful. How could that be in this hostile environment? I mean, this little town of Nogales, Sonora, Nogales, Arizona, can't even barely support their own infrastructure, to produce water. We buried a 1 million gallon capacity storage system. So when it does
for
rain,
water.
For water storage, rainwater storage, and our buildings are designed
So it's like a giant cistern.
it collects every drop, whatever falls on the parking lot, whatever falls on the roof. It's all filtered through planters and nature and goes into this underground storage facility, and then it's pumped out to irrigate the landscape. So we're not depending on any potable city water. And plants love rainwater.
Yeah, they do.
Way more.
They're kind of funny about
city
that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so it's in a garden.
Do you have different challenges? Have you done work on the northern border with Canada?
We just started one. We're under construction in Blaine, Washington, which is the total opposite climate.
I was going to say, yeah.
That's okay. It's called Pacific Highway Land Port of Entry, and it's north of Blaine, of course, and it's it's right on the Canadian border. And it's actually an existing port, a nice port that built 20 years ago by a very good architect under the Design Excellence Program. Unfortunately, the construction back then, only 20 years ago, wasn't robust enough to keep the deluge of water out. And so we were commissioned to upgrade everything, reskin the building without shutting anything down, and modifying the architecture so that it would be more energy efficient and dry and reduce operational costs, which we are doing.
And did you have to make another cistern there?
No, it rains all the time.
Okay.
Yeah,
So we don't need to store any water.
Need to get rid of.
But it's most of our jobs, we have a rainwater harvesting system of some kind. My house in Phoenix, it's an above ground cistern, but it's a much smaller piece of property. Oregon, the Oregon coast, I've did a house there, and we also store rainwater. I mean, it's precious.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody knows it, but unfortunately few architects address it.
I'm still trying to visualize this because I haven't been to one of these ports. So as I'm coming in my car to it, I guess I'm seeing, because of the elevations, there must be some sort of embankments and that I can see from my...
They're all different.
All around.
They're all different, and the closer you get, the more controlled your movements become. If you're in your car or you're walking or you're on a bicycle.
It's a little bit like approaching a very elaborate toll booth.
Yeah.
That's elaborate toll booth is an understatement, but because of the business aspect of import-export business, taxes and permits and inspections, and I mean it's a huge operation.
I never quite understood. Maybe you can explain to me logistically, since you design these things. I mean, I'm used to going through toll booths, right? As just
not anymore, but back in the day.
There's still a bunch of them.
Yeah.
And in Florida and other places, and some of them are by camera now, but you still have to stop and you put in your quarter or whatever and go on. The toll booth would never ask me questions or inspect my car.
Therefore, you're not intimidated, are you?
Right. So there's no prospect of me being shunted off in some other section. With all those cars, how do you allow for some percentage of them they're going to have to go off to some other process?
It's all one
You have to.
great design challenge, and we have to, you're right, and it's a lot of fun, and it's all doable. But
Not if you get pulled off.
well, even I feel guilty, and I haven't done anything when I cross the border, but I just, it's human nature to feel guilty, and being inspected is intimidating, whether you get out of the car or not. But that factors into our philosophy of creating a a welcoming experience or at least an improved experience.
I think there was a skit on maybe Canadian TV or something years ago where they had a port of entry and this drug dealer was coming across, obvious in the car, and they stopped. And of course, the Canadians, very nice, offered him a little coffee while the dogs were sniffing.
Did you have a nice trip, eh?
Well, now that may be true on the Canadian border. It is night and day.
Yeah.
You know what the longest country-to-country border is in the world?
Ours, I think, isn't it? Between
Which one?
Us and Canada?
Yes.
Yeah.
The longest in the world. It's the length of the Great Wall of China, almost to the mile. The southern border, on the other hand, is a third as long. The Canadian border gets 2/3 of the money. Southern border gets a third. There's not even a picket fence on the northern border.
No.
There's a mowed strip, to designate which
And there's
side
usually
you're
like
on.
a little concrete pylon or something.
Yeah,
right on
and
the
picnic
line.
tables and
Yep.
all of that.
Yeah.
It's hilarious for an architect that
Right.
works on the southern border.
Yeah.
And again, the nonsense of politics. But we with every job we try to improve the experience, minimize the politics. And we keep getting hired to do them again and again. And now we have a very good relationship with Customs and Border Protection, at least on the southern border, because they know we're well-intended. They see everybody wins. It's healthier, it's safer, it's efficient, throughput. We don't want people... And that's why we usually get hired, is because the traffic's backed up for 10 hours.
Yeah.
And again, nobody wins on that.
Well, and you have to do this, as you were saying earlier, you have to do it while you can't close it.
Correct.
So you sort of have to do it while it's operating.
That's just sugar on top of the cake. I mean, I
Man,
love it. I absolutely
You are
love
some kind of
it.
Zen salesman here.
But
Well, he has a fax machine, Tom, so he uses that all the time.
No, I have 14 of the greatest people you ever heard of working at Jones Studio. Can you imagine that? 14 people doing these huge jobs?
Well, with all the technology now
Yeah,
that's available to you, right?
But even though the program is like on the opposite end of the spectrum of somebody's personal residence, it's all still a house. Somebody's living in these buildings for a long time during the day, and we treat them like that. Our goal is to, people don't even want to go home, because they prefer to be working in a building design.
That might be a stretch.
Well, it's real easy to design a space better than 99% of people's homes.
Yeah, I guess that's
real
true.
easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
View of a garden, natural lighting, beautiful materials. I mean, it's not hard.
Eddie, thanks for joining us. It's really been a lot of fun.
Well, that went fast, didn't it?
The book is Jones Studio Houses, Sensual Modernism.
Yeah. And we didn't talk about houses.
No, we didn't.
Well, sort of.
Yeah, sort of.
Thank you.
That was George chatting with Eddie Jones. Award-winning landscape architect Signe Nielsen designed the amazing landscape of Little Island at Pier 55 in New York City. Little Island is a magnificent floating park above the Hudson River that opened in May of 2021. As founding principal at Matthews Nielsen Landscape Architects, Signe has spent more than 25 years reinvigorating modern urban spaces, including mid-century icons such as the Lincoln Center and the TWA Hotel. She is a professor of urban design and landscape architecture at Pratt and past president of the New York City Public Design Commission. Here's our conversation poolside at the U.S. Modernist Compound with Signe Nielsen.
What was this little piece of water pier land before you ever got associated with it? What was it before it became what it is now?
It was famous for being part of the Cunard and White Star lines, where all of our major passenger ships sailed for abroad. And I think it's most famous for receiving the survivors of the Titanic.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Was that a Cunard or White Star?
White Star.
It was a White Star liner.
Right.
Yeah, which never made it.
Right. Anyway, it was a passenger ship terminal, and then it was beginning to crumble. I think the passenger ships departed in about the mid-50s, and then it just lay fallow and then was kind of completely destroyed in Hurricane Sandy.
So Sandy wiped it out.
Sandy wiped it out.
And who was the client here? Was it a city property or what, privately owned? Who owned it?
It is owned and still is owned by Hudson River Park Trust, which is a joint city and state agency. So all of that land and the piers and the inter-pier water are all under the jurisdiction of the Hudson River Park Trust.
Oh, okay. I always thought it was the Port Authority since, it was kind of a port.
Well, there may have been some funky transfer somewhere down the road, but when the Hudson River Park Act was passed in the early 2000s, it was all transferred to Hudson River Park Trust.
Okay. And when was the decision made to do something different with that after Sandy?
Immediately, because as soon as, according to our state Department of Environmental Conservation, as soon as you lose deck, in other words, shade over water, you have to put it back within 2 years or it is forever open water again. So it was immediate that decision was made.
Shade over water. That's
For
a specific... Is that an environmental
Yes.
thing? Okay.
But also a sort of public trust kind of thing, because it came from the public originally into somebody's hands, and it goes back if it's not actually rebuilt on again.
Okay.
The shade is specifically about marine habitat.
Okay. Now, Little Island is not on a raised platform above the water, is it?
It is.
Oh,
yeah.
well, I would have not... Going there, it looks like a little island, It's got big hills, and it's beautiful.
But it's all supported by piles.
Wow.
Yeah, from the highway, it's easier to see it, because
Okay.
you're driving by, you can see all the concrete
Well,
pilings.
I just walked up to it.
Yeah, but you would miss it. That's an interesting thing. You might not see that it was suspended in that way.
Well, that part I would miss, but, the rest of it was hard to miss. It's right next to, like, an airport or an air terminal, or...
There is a heliport
That's what it is.
not too far away.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the Intrepid is sort of in that general area, right?
Yes, we actually designed the Intrepid Pier. So it's a funny thing. You can identify the streets by subtracting 40 from the pier number.
Oh. That's an old New York trick.
Yeah.
So Pier 86, which is the Intrepid, is 44th Street. And this is 14th Street.
So how did you get into the island building business?
Well, many years ago, between 93 and 97, we, along with another firm, did the master plan for Hudson River Park. In other words, once it was decided that this was no longer going to be a viable working waterfront, they decided to make it public parkland. So we did the master plan. So I've actually been involved in Hudson River Park for, since 93.
And I don't think people realize when they read about Little Island that it's actually quite large. I mean, it's 2.5 acres, roughly?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. And as Tom said, your experience of going on it is just this kind of unexpected pleasure. People are going crazy about this place.
It has topography.
That is a fun thing. But, back to what we were talking about with the marine life.
Yeah.
The concern was that because this is a square and not a rectangle, that there would be more shade under the pier. So that's why the southwest and southeast corners are tipped up to let the low angle of the morning and afternoon sun get underneath the pier and not result in more shade than a rectangle.
So does shade tend to drive out certain species or hurt them in some way?
It drives out species. It also doesn't encourage spawning. It's sort of, it's dead under there.
Okay.
In the dark.
Okay, so there's no valuable marine life that wants it to be shady.
Well, I think in the deep ocean,
yes,
but in this inter-pier area, no.
Right.
So when you go on the island, and I haven't had a chance to do that yet, but it's on my list for next time in New York, people have told me that they really do feel removed from the city, even though the city is completely all around you still? I mean, you still see all the buildings and the water and the towers and everything. How did you achieve that effect?
Well, the architect, we have to credit Thomas Heatherwick for the original vision of this. He wanted it to feel as if you were leaving the city. And so those two approaches he likens to gangplanks, that you sort of mentally leave the city behind. But there's a reason for the pier being set off from the land, because all the other piers, of course, are perpendicular and attached, was to raise it up out of the storm surge and sea level rise.
Future-proofing it.
Yeah.
Future-proofing it. So you actually ascend 10 feet in that distance that you are
Going up the ramp.
going up the ramps.
So before too long, there's something between you and the city skyline behind you, and it's a trick.
It's a trick.
I mean, it's just fascinating. Now, tell me a little bit about the construction of these piers, because they look very interesting.
They're phenomenal. So the structure is
Like little tulips, they sort of, or martini glasses.
they've been likened to just about everything.
Yeah.
Including elephant butts, by the way.
Oh, okay.
But we just developed this nomenclature of pots. But in fact, you're right, they're made out of 5 petals. So tulips is probably a more appropriate term. And they sit on all those 5 petals come together and are attached at a capital. And then that capital sits on top of a pile.
Okay.
And there are some 328 piles. Not all of them have pots on top of them because the cost was kind of astronomical. But they are amazing. There are 39 different forms that make up the 128 different pots. So it was a real stroke of brilliance on the part of the structural engineers to figure out how to make a lot of different shapes out of only 39 forms.
Huh.
And how far down do they go into the ground? They would have to go pretty far, I would think.
So the rock of Manhattan drops off pretty dramatically as you go
From the shoreline.
From the shoreline. So the piles that are closest to the shore are about 90 feet down to rock, and the ones at the furthest west are 260 feet
Oh, my.
Whoa,
down into rock.
that is a drop-off.
Yeah.
So how long did that take?
So I'm going to go back to the marine life story. And we only allow pile driving during the non-spawning months of the fish, which means May through October.
Okay.
So it took 3 pile driving seasons or 3 years to drive all of the piles for the bridges,
yeah.
the ramps, and the island itself.
So in order to meet our original rule about doing something within 2 years, that's just when you have to start, I guess, right?
Correct. You
don't
just
have
have to get the permit.
Okay. That's, okay. Because I was thinking to do this in 2 years would be incredible.
No, just need the permit.
So how long was it from the start of the process with the permit until completion?
Well, I worked on it for 8 years. Thomas Heatherwick worked on it for 9 years because he had done an earlier scheme, which was rejected. And so then when he came back with the scheme that's more or less what's there today, it was 8 years. That's when I was hired. And it was 8 years from start to completion.
When did it open?
May of 2021.
Okay. Yeah.
So-
it's
Right in the middle of the pandemic.
yeah.
Which is why I think, honestly, it helped give it a lot of good press.
Yeah.
I think New Yorkers were desperate to be outside.
Something they could go to.
right to escape the city with this trick.
And explore around. So I've heard with reviews online that one of the things that people like about the island that they weren't expecting was just really how kind of all natural it is, in the sense of, you don't have a McDonald's kiosk in the middle and things are discreetly hidden among that. How did that get accomplished?
So I guess there are 3 things that one would say are hidden. That would be the large amphitheater, which is
Yeah.
850-person amphitheater.
Yeah.
And that...
there was some theater going on there when we showed up.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
It's lively then. So it is tucked behind and down into landscape. So you do not see that at all when you first enter the Pier. The other one is a rather small theater, which they use for a lot of children's and adult programming, small talks such as this. It's a very intimate space, and that is hidden from view when you first enter. And then not hidden from view is a large plaza. And today it has a couple of food kiosks. They almost look like Airstreams, but they're not shiny metal. And then some seating. And that's pretty visible.
Okay. Were there any particular kinds of species that you were going for there that you were able to get that are special?
Plant?
Yeah.
Fish?
Well, more plant, I would think.
Homo sapiens?
Well, a couple of critical things. One is it's a very windy site. Second of all, it is a maritime site, meaning it will also get some amount of salt from the air.
Yeah.
Even though water will not, hopefully, ever get up there, salt water will. So those are critical. So that tends to lead one toward smaller leaves that don't kind of shred in the wind, and plants that have some level of salt tolerance. After that, I was looking for a lot of texture, seasonal, really 12 seasons of color and texture.
12 seasons?
I'm sorry, 12 months. Excuse me.
Well,
I think it'd be spectacular to have 12 seasons of color.
Yeah.
12 months.
Okay, got it.
So obviously in our cold winter, color is bark, color is evergreen, color is twigs, berries, and to some extent dried seed heads of certain flowers. Although we just started cutting them all back because probably in another month, bulbs will start coming up.
Okay.
So we don't want to, got to give them space.
So what will it look like, say, in July or August?
Oh, it's lovely. It's so colorful. As the summer gets hotter, the bloom colors get more intense. So it starts sort of pastel-y in the early spring, gets sort of warmer and warmer tonally until it gets quite hot in the July, August.
Yeah.
And then it starts to go muted with the fall, and then, has a...
You really do
different
think
color.
about 12 seasons, don't you?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of how you have to,
Yeah.
really, because they're so different. Now, have people caught on to this as a venue, like they want to get married there, or
They can't.
they can't? Okay.
Because it's public property. So Little Island has a 20-year lease. They can operate it for 20 years, and they are obligated to maintain it because it is sort of an absurdly complicated landscape.
Yeah.
And without the commitment for maintenance, I never would have designed this. So under the terms of that lease agreement, there cannot be any privatization of the
Okay.
park.
Okay.
But people could sneak off and just grab a
Sure.
minister and while
Yeah,
nobody's
it's just a
looking.
quickie.
Sure.
Yeah.
So then how do they do the public programming then with the amphitheater and the other theater? How does that work?
It's all managed by Little Island.
Okay.
Little Island finds the performers, the directors, all of the stagehands. Everything is through Little Island.
Okay.
Is this privately now funded?
Yes.
Okay. Whose
Through
money?
the trust. Through the trust.
Okay.
No. It's privately funded through Barry Diller and Dion von
Oh,
Furstenberg.
that's right. I knew there was some
The
big...
DDF.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Barry.
That's a great gift.
Diane.
It is an amazing gift.
Yeah.
So it was $200 million of hard cost for construction, another $60 million for soft costs, and that's without the programming and maintenance into the future.
Let's see, is pile driving a hard cost?
It sure is.
Bam, bam, bam.
It sure is.
And it's free to the public, right?
It's free to the public. And the programming in the little performing area that I mentioned, that's always free. And in the large amphitheater, it's a balance between free, low cost, and then ticketed. but there's very much a desire for it to be affordable for especially people from the neighborhood. I don't quite know how that works. I don't know how they figure that out, but I do know that 50% of the tickets are free or low cost.
Well, I would love to see a performance of something there. That
There's
would be
some good
fantastic.
ones.
Yeah.
Programming is through middle of May through end of September.
So my last question, I was fascinated by a phrase we came across in researching you. What is tactical urbanism?
Tactical urbanism is a small intervention that hopefully will have a big effect. So, for example, street seats, those taking over a parking area and putting in a seating area, which now seems old hat, was in fact a tactical urbanist strategy that then resulted in a whole plan and now has been accepted by the city. So outdoor dining is now a permanent fixture.
Yeah.
Street seats. The idea that you would take away parking, is mind-blowing. But everyone's cool with it now.
Yeah, desperate times call for creative measures.
So that's an example of a tactical urbanist measure. It's a small intervention that hopefully has big impact as it expands.
I think decades ago, the idea of fixing broken glass in certain neighborhoods,
broken windows
theory was the idea that by keeping things together like that, it would improve the whole neighborhood and people's perception of it and wanting to take care of it.
Right.
What's your next project?
Well, nothing quite as wonderful as Little Island quite yet, but it's interesting that I guess my reputation as a plant person has really
Blossomed?
Has blossomed. Yes, I was trying to avoid that.
Got that one.
So we've been asked to do some interesting projects like different nature preserves and trying to bring them into the next, through climate change, sort of thinking ahead for the next 20 years of climate change impacts. So those are the kind of projects we're doing, several in Long Island. We did my alma mater up in Massachusetts, which was actually a master plan, but it was also very much
What's your alma mater?
Smith College.
Okay.
And that was about thinking about the landscape. It has an Olmsted history for the next 20 years. So I guess I'm moving into very long-range thinking that I hope I'm able to think well.
Well, I can't wait
Aren't
to visit.
we all?
Yes. I can't wait to see Little Island. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you both. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
George and I were chatting about New York's Little Island with Signe Nielsen of Matthews Nielsen Landscape Architects.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs. And by Modernist realtor Angela Roll. Want to go with us to Modernism Week in February 2023 and stay with us at the U.S. Modernist Compound? Email george@usmodernist.org. Okay, Tom, take us out.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 15,000 significant modernist houses, and access 4 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song was performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. Rogue archivist Carrie Cesarino did some heavy lifting this Modernism Week, researching dozens of guests and making me and George sound thoughtful, clever, and well-informed even when we were a little hungover. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I will be back soon with another Sitting by the Pool, looking at the mountains, drinking martinis, talking architecture edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.